Excuse me, aren't you
What do you want?
Aren't you the author of this book? I recognise you from
Yeah,
the
that's
magazine.
right, I am. I'm a tramp this week.
You're a tramp this week?
No, tramp? Yeah, go on. What did you want?
I'd like you to sign it.
Oh, OK,
As
go
the
on.
author.
Give me 30p then.
Oh, my
go on.
goodness. All right.
Yeah, go on. All right, go on. OK, now leave me alone so I want to go to sleep. All right, I signed it. Now leave me alone.
Oh, charming.
OK, enjoy the book, though.
Thank you.
Thanks for buying it.
The launch of Addict in Leicester Square with a host of look-alike personalities chosen to add glamour to the event. As a young man, Stephen Smith lived the life of a wealthy playboy, but his drug dependency became so strong that he ended up taking 100 amphetamine tablets a day, losing his job, his mind, his money and his wife.
Perhaps by people reading this book, both kids who take drugs today and their parents, they'll understand better that it can happen to anybody, and anybody can finish up really in the clutches of addiction.
He ended up living on the streets near Euston and Leicester Square with the winos for around 5 years. And now, because he managed to literally drag himself off the gutter, he wants to help others by giving all the royalties of his book to the homeless charity Shelter and drug rehabilitation centres.
All I hope is that even if he doesn't sell millions of copies of this book, that it just stops one person taking that ecstasy tablet or one person having that extra drink that's going to just tip them off the edge or maybe even kill them. And that's, for that one person stopping and being safe, it'll all be worth it.
All that Stephen hopes is people living on the streets will end up receiving some of the money from the book to help them get back on the level.
I was brought up in an upper middle class family in North London, suburbia. Quite wealthy parents, but my parents were never there for me. My father was a compulsive gambler. My mother was always out socialising, and that left a big void. So my mother as such was a nanny that brought me up, who was a bit deranged because she used to read to me from the age of 5 till 8 the same Robin Hood story night after night for 3 years, and fall asleep drunk at the end of the bed herself. And probably by the time I was 8, I thought I was a reincarnation of Robin Hood. And this woman was then suddenly sacked because I was now, for me, she was my mother, and replaced with another nanny. And I think from that moment onwards, I became a very, very disturbed child. Started wetting the bed and so on. And you know, by the time I was 13, was a kind of rebel, or very disturbed young 13-year-old. And that's when, unhappy at school with anti-Semitic harassment, I cycled into the rougher areas and teamed up with another boy, although I became the leader, fueled by my parents' wine. I was now drinking wine from the family drinks cabinet, and we swooped like Robin Hoods on our bikes and started snatching women's handbags. Got away with it for about 2 or 3 months. The other boy left me. He was quite frightened after the first successful handbag snatch, but I carried on as a kind of sole raider. Got away with it quite some time. Can't really remember what I did with the money, so I didn't need it in the first place. I had everything, I needed at home. And then I was caught. I went, took the wrong turning after quite a heroic late night snatch, and I was sentenced to a boys' remand home for 3 weeks for court reports. And it was there that my father, who was now very, very embarrassed, middle class, upper middle class tailor, his son out snatching handbags, deemed it better that I was a sick child rather than a criminal child. And the court sentenced me as an inpatient in a locked ward at Free and Barnet, a local, well-known London psychiatric hospital. And this place was, had corridors 3 miles long, so quite frightening for a 14, 15-year-old kid. Suddenly find himself, with grown-ups roaming about in dressing gowns and so on. And it was there that I was sexually molested by a doctor who gave me my first amphetamine tablet.
It's 20 years since Stephen Smith lived on the streets, but he hasn't forgotten.
You don't remember me, do you? I knew you from Pound Lane in Kilburn.
Right. I forget your first name again.
Steve.
Are you off the street now?
I am off the street now, yeah.
How did you manage that?
Well, I had a stroke of luck. I met a girl in the street who eventually I married, and I pulled myself together.
It's Stephen's 54 and a businessman now. He divides his time between his wife and children in Germany and the vagrants on the streets of London. The days of amphetamines and whiskey are over. Now, he says, it's his turn to help others.
If you've got trouble with your plumbing, you call in a plumber. And if you've got trouble with a homeless issue, you couldn't get anybody better than somebody who's been homeless. I know what it's like.
And this was what it was like for 6 years.
It all brings back very bad memories. Nothing changes. This is where I slept here, night after night after night. This hurts. Nothing changes. It's all still the same.
But things have changed. Down the road at King's Cross Station, officers have been operating the so-called zero-tolerance policing project, tackling problems like drunkenness and begging. It's become the new political catchphrase of the year, and it's what stirred Stephen into action, prompting him to write this letter to Mr. Major and Mr. Blair, asking for the post of Minister of the Gutter. He hasn't had a reply yet, but with the backing of several businessmen, he's now planning to stand as a candidate in the Wirral South by-election.
We'll put across real issues that the other politicians haven't got the courage to put across. I would approach firms initially in the London area and then spread throughout the country to give up their empty accommodation, which is available for redevelopment and so on. And I've already got 2 firms who temporarily said that they will give accommodation and they will give finance.
Back in the comfort of his own home, Stephen, like every former alcoholic, lives for today. But with his by-election challenge, he believes that, unlike the other parties, he's the only one offering the homeless a tomorrow. Sophie McGarrigle, Sky News in central London.
This is a book called Addict. This is its author, Stephen Smith, and the thing about this story is, I mean, books always have these incredible kind of hypes on the front, don't they? A 20-year drug and drink horror trip from riches to insanity to the gutter. But it is a true story.
Yes, it's a true story of my life.
So at what point did you get addicted?
I was addicted from the age of 14 onwards to amphetamine tablets.
And you were addicted for 26 years?
I was addicted for 26 years.
So that was till you were 40?
Yeah. I couldn't exist without amphetamine tablets.
Did you leave your family?
Yes, I did. I ran away from home when I was 14 years old.
And just lived rough?
And, well, I drifted into a life initially of crime, where I lived very well for the first few years. But towards the end of...
petty thieving and stuff?
Well, and various other bigger crimes as well. And then towards the end of my addiction, I was living in the streets.
Absolutely outside?
Yeah, out for
cardboard box,
yeah,
we're talking?
Yeah, for 5 years.
I've never asked anybody this before. What's it actually like being on the other end of people just walking straight by you or sneering at you? Or do people abuse you?
No, it really, it's like a glass screen, is an invisible glass screen, is separating you from the rest of the world. It's as though you're detached from everything. You're there and the rest of the world is moving by.
Because you always feel like cruel walking by people, you know, and you always think it's like a stab to their heart. Has it got to the stage there where you've lost self-esteem to such an extent that you actually haven't got any more to lose?
Yeah, you've lost the self-esteem to such an extent. You've lost contact with the outside world. You know, normal people are going somewhere. You've got nowhere to go. Normal people have perhaps got somebody to ring, somebody to write to. Yeah. You've got nobody to ring, nobody to write to.
And not even with the other people who are homeless? Does that form any kind of surrogate
There was a bond with me, with various groups of winos, of which I was one. But the bond is really only a kind of mutual bond in sharing a bottle.
A phone. Frank in London is on the line. Hi, Frank.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, not too bad. I just want to say good luck to Stephen, and I'm really proud of him. You know, I was in the same position myself one time, and I think it can be achieved, and the best of luck to him in his future, and I hope he does get a seat. We need someone like that.
Thank you very much, and you know, if you see me sitting in Westminster, you can always come and say hello to me.
Okay. Right,
Frank, just quickly, how did you get in that position, and have you managed to get yourself out of it?
I did, yeah. I had an addiction as well, between drinking, gambling and things like that, and I was down there in the streets. But through the big issue, I got my self-esteem back, and went to try to go to college from there, but I didn't get into college, and I got a daytime job, and now I'm plumbing, and everything was going well for me. I have a girlfriend, and my life was fantastic.
And now you've got us on cable. Wow.
So
well done. I mean, I'm impressed. You know when you're in a real trough yourself and you think, I'd never get out of this. You kind of do, but well, brilliant. Brilliant. I don't mean to patronise, but fantastic. Thank you very much for calling.
Imagine this. You're homeless and hungry, living on the streets of London, when one day you see a beautiful German girl in a crowd. Your eyes meet and you fall in love. Well, you move to Germany, where you become a successful businessman. Sounds like a script from a Hollywood movie rather than a true story, doesn't it? Well, actually, it's both. And the man at the centre of this truth is stranger than fiction tale is Stephen Smith. Now, at Christmas, Steve came back to England and the streets of Leeds to raise money for homeless charities. 5 News caught up with him as he spent 17 days in the cold. Well, today, he's back in London to sign a film deal with Star Wars producer Gary Kurtz. And he's also revisiting the doorways he used to live in to raise money for homeless charity Centrepoint. And Steve joins us now. Steve, thank you very much indeed for getting up this early. Just take us back to the beginning. How did you become a homeless drug addict?
Well, drug and drink addiction was my downfall, and with any drug and drink addiction, slowly everything gets lost. And in the mid-70s, I finished up living in the streets. One of these doorways I lived in was here in Browns in South Molton Street.
How bad did things get, Steve?
Very, very bad. I was a very lost individual. By the time I met my wife, I'd gone down a journey that I don't think many people ever could come back from. I was a very, very sick and lost individual.
Now, how has your... Tell us about meeting this German lady who you've subsequently married, and tell us about how your previous life has affected your subsequent life.
Well, that is the end of my biography, Addicts, was where I was aimlessly roaming down the King's Road in London, and there was a young girl on holiday for 5 days, a 24-year-old girl. We spoke to each other, and my wife tells me now that she became my wife, Honey Laurie, that I cried my eyes out for 20 minutes, saying I once had it all and I lost everything, and here I am in the gutter. But cutting a long story short, she stuffed her address in my top pocket. 2 or 3 months later, I wrote from a locked psychiatric unit to her home in Munich, and she sent a photo back. And the rest, I won't spoil the book for people, but or the film. She sent me a photo. I finished up going over there that Christmas. We fell in love, married, lived happily ever after. We've got 2 sons now, Oliver and Julian. And, you know, it's now a long, long time ago since I slept for real in the shop doorways.
Well, it's a great ending to the story, and an awful start to the story, as it were. What can we learn, Steve, from your experiences?
Well, I think what you can learn is that, you know, anybody, and I've said this in Addict, the biography, that anybody can wind up in a shop doorway. None of us were born tramps. None of us started life off in shop doorways. And there's still many people today in shop doorways that could do with our help.
Down and remembering back. Stephen Smith finds it painful even to think about the time he spent on these streets, addicted to amphetamines and homeless. Nearly 2 decades on, he's returned, even sadder to find people still living the way he did.
It hurts a lot when I think of what it's like, and it's like a glass screen that separates you from the human race. And I don't think we as a society care where he spends his Christmas, as long as we're warm and as long as we've got plenty to eat.
Stephen's own story has a happy ending. After years on the streets, he was sitting in this very pub in Chelsea when he met a young German tourist. They chatted, they arranged to meet again, and 16 years later, they're happily married. It was this relationship that Stephen says helped him quit his drug habit. Eventually, he and his wife, Hanne Laurie, settled in Germany and had 2 sons.
Long time.
How are you?
Stephen's come back to England partly to track down some of the people who helped him when he was on the streets. This barber in Tottenham regularly gave him money for food all those years ago.
I'm really a bit emotional because, you know, I can remember it now, you know, really what it was like, you know, it's hard to put into words, but to come into somebody's business and, you know, kind of put your hand out and they regularly gave you.
I feel glad, you know, someone to remember me, you know, because, you know, when you're good to people, sometimes you get people that, you know, but this gentleman is so good to see him, to come to appreciate, you know.
Stephen's now written his autobiography to be published next month. He'll be donating a portion of the profits from sales to the charity Shelter to help their work with the homeless. For now, though, touched by remembering again other people's generosity, Stephen's busy planning a party for London's homeless on Boxing Day in St James's Park. It's the place he used to spend Christmas all those years ago.
You can see people veering off a bit. Nothing against the public, don't get me wrong. They're dealing with something that's starting to look in a state. And mentally, I've got in one or two very bad phases where I was quite frightened late at night, thinking, am I back? Is this a rerun of my life, or what? And I had to go and see a priest late one night for him to convince me, no, this is not a rerun. If you want, you can ring your wife in Germany. You can fly home tonight. And I calmed down. Horrendous amphetamine tablets. One horrendous 24-hour-a-day habit, apart from else. The only time I didn't take pills was when I was asleep. Hello there. How are you? My name's Steve. What's yours? Chris. Hi, Chris. I'll sit down with you, yeah. I was, I'll put that down there. I was homeless myself for about 20 years ago, and I used to live on the streets here in Leeds. How long you been homeless for? 12 years. Really? I think I've heard of them, yeah. And then what? With me, it was drugs mainly that brought my downfall. You know, drink as well, but drugs. What, any of that with you? Yeah, heroin. Heroin, yeah. I took amphetamine drugs, became hopelessly addicted to them, and finished up here as a result of it. Which is actually what I hope to open in London. In Archway, I'm going to open.
About the homeless?
Well, we've got to build shelters throughout the country and not bring out initiatives. And today I present a petition to Tony Blair, which says exactly how it feels and how it did feel over the last 17 days living rough. And this book comes out in January. Mean Street Diaries. All the profits and all the proceeds go to the Princess Diana Memorial Fund. And it will be a taped and photographic record of the last 17 days I slept in car parks in Leeds where the TV documentary was made.
What were some of the worst experiences that you encountered during that time?
It's a lot worse than it ever was for me, but one must remember that this is 20 years down the line. I'm 20 years older. I wasn't on drugs or drink, so everything I felt, and I felt it, you know, from beginning to end. There's a lot more violence on the streets. There's a whole new generation of youngsters on the streets, where when I was on the streets myself, as I describe in Addict, my biography, I was probably, I thought, one of the youngest, and all the other down and outs were older. Now there seems to be a whole generation of teenage children and in their young 20s, either drug and drink addicted or some not drink addicted, who've hit the streets because of the benefits being cut off and family breakdowns. And unless we do something about it, you could interview me in 5 years' time and the numbers would treble and multiply.
Did you ever stay at the crypts or not? I've been there, yeah.
I used to be in the crypt. I used to sleep in the crypt.
Well, do you remember it when it was like concrete? Say that's the wall there, look. All you had like that when it was concrete, like a shelf, and then you get to reserve a space, didn't you, with a bit of newspaper or your coat or something. That's when I remember it. No dormitory, nothing, just concrete all around the edge. Yeah.
That's where they used to keep the coffin.
Are you getting a lot of new customers as to say each day? Yeah, it's not the same old crowd, there's a constant influx.
Oh no, there's new people in regularly.
Really?
Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah. But more so young people. It seems to be going towards the younger end rather than...
And are these young people from Leeds, or do you think they're drifting in from everywhere?
There's people from all over.
That's the big difference between now and then. When I was in the streets, I was one of the youngest people, that's as it appeared to me. There were all older people in the streets. Now it seems there's a whole new generation of youngsters living in the streets, like a cult thing. Unfortunately, both drugs and alcohol have taken over, and these youngsters have got no hope. They're in a blind alley, they can't get out.
Manifesto then to solve that problem?
Well, instead of refitting the Royal Yacht or even having a Royal Yacht, spend that money on building hostels in every major city throughout England and housing the homeless.
Natasha?
I quite agree with that. John Bird, who launched The Big Issue himself, was a homeless man, wasn't he? And he turned his life around. He's now giving that opportunity to the people that sell The Big Issue. What do you think about the magazine? Because in itself it's caused a lot of controversy, hasn't it? And it often hit the front pages with, you know, this man earns £1,000 a week from selling The Big Issue, and what a fraud.
Yeah, no, I think The Big Issue is a wonderful thing. It gives people on the streets a chance of self-respect, and instead of begging, they're now selling a magazine.
And I think it was a very exaggerated story of a man earning £1,000 a week. He's got to sell a lot of magazines.
Stephen Smith has come full circle. 20 years ago, it was him who was sleeping rough on London streets. Now he's giving today's homeless the chance of a roof over their heads by turning this disused office building at Stonebridge Park into a temporary home for them.
If the choice is between a shop doorway or somewhere where you've got a bed and a roof over your head and genuine help for the future, then I hope that they'll have enough trust in me as an ex-down and out myself to take that hope.
With the promise of beds and blankets from 2 London hotels and financial backing from several businesses, Mr. Smith wants to show how easy it is to make good use of the capital's empty buildings.
This is one of the main areas, apart from the ball ring, where the shop doorways are taken up.
In 2 old ambulances, volunteers will patrol London, offering the homeless a bed in the hostel.
How long have you been out now, Ruff?
Since August.
Since August?
July, yeah.
Within half an hour of arriving in the Strand last night, the hostel had already lined up its first resident.
Yeah, I'll give it a whirl.
And so the chance of a roof over his head for the first time since last summer, and a vital first step towards what could be a new life.
Now, I think this is 1998. I hope to open my first shelter, only a modest one, in North London, so I might house 4 or 6 or 8 people. Nothing enormous, just a small one. And when that works and we can see progress with these 4, 6 or 8 people, then perhaps the government will listen to me.